Today we're going to talk about finding domain and range of a graph. So domain and range is a way that we use to describe the way our graph looks or how much of the graph it covers. So our domain, remember, is all your x values. If you remember on a graph, your x values go from left to right. So what you need to do is first find your first x value. So either if your graph starts from the left or if it starts from the right. And then we're going to write it in what we call interval notation. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Your range, remember, is your y values. So we're looking at the graph from bottom to top. And we again look at our starting point at either the highest or the lowest y value. So what I'm talking about, interval notation. So say it started from 5 and then it ends at 7. If we use brackets, that means these numbers are included. So remember, open and closed circles, open and closed dots, that's basically, this is a closed dot, so it would include those. If we use a parenthesis, so if we do parenthesis 5 to 7 and then a bracket, the parenthesis means it's not included. So that would be like a open circle. And then sometimes we'll use infinity. So if we have a graph that's always going up or down or left or right, we use infinity. And so we always do a parenthesis with infinity because that cannot be included, and say to 8 or something. So with interval notation, you put the smallest number first, which in this case, if we're doing infinity, it would be negative infinity. Smallest number first, largest number second. So we're going to start by answering some questions, and these are basically the questions you're going to use to figure out domain and range of a graph. So here we have some g of x. It doesn't matter what the equation of it is because we have the graph here. It's completely defined by the graph shown below. Answer the following questions based on the graph. So determine the minimum and maximum x values represented on the graph. So let's start with the minimum. Minimum means if we start from the left and we're going right, where do we first hit the graph? So we first hit the graph at this point. What we need to do is look at the x value at that point, which would be that number, which would be 1, 2, 3, negative 3. So your minimum equals negative 3. The maximum x value is where our graph ends. So the widest point where it ends is the point at the end of the graph here, and we count our x value there would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So our max x value is 6. So then it asks to determine the minimum and maximum y values represented on this graph. So if we're looking at y values, minimum starts at the bottom, so the lowest y point would actually be down here. It's not one of the end points. So the y value at this point would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So your minimum would equal negative 5. And now the maximum is going to be the highest point because, again, we're doing y. So this case is not the highest point because this one's just a tad bit higher. So we're going to use this also for the maximum on the y. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So my max is 4. So my domain, I'm just going to put d equals my minimum and my maximum. These are the two numbers I'm going to use for my domain. Because these are both included because we have closed circles, I'm going to do a bracket, negative 3, comma 6. So this notation means the domain goes from negative 3 to 6. The range, so r, again, these are closed circles, so I'm going to do brackets. The smallest was negative 5, and the largest was a positive 4. So again, I do an ending bracket. And that's how you do domain and range on a closed graph, where it has a beginning and end. Now what we're going to talk about is a graph where it does not have a beginning or end. So here I have the graph of the equation, x squared minus 2x minus 3. I want to know what the domain and range is in this. So most of the time, either you're given a graph or I'll expect you to graph something and tell me domain and range. So you don't have to go through the steps we did last time. So if I'm doing domain, you need to remember domain goes from left to right. So if I'm going left, is there an ending point? In this case, because I have arrows at the end of these, this graph is constantly going to the left and to the right. So there is not an ending point or a beginning point on either side of this. So when we do not have ending or beginning, we say it goes from negative infinity to infinity. What I want you to notice is that I have parentheses instead of brackets, because as I said earlier, your infinity cannot be included because we don't have a definite number there. Range. So range is up and down. This graph is only going up, but it does have a lowest point down here. Please remember range is y. So if we're looking at y, we look at 1, 2, 3, 4, it's down at -4. It's a closed circle, so I have a bracket, it's at -4, and then since it keeps on going up forever and ever and ever, it goes from -4 to infinity. Again, notice this one I end with a parenthesis instead of a bracket. Last graph that we're going to do domain and range on. So I have this function graphed here. The cube root of x minus 5 is down here. We want to do domain and range. So domain. Remember, domain goes left and right. You need to look at your arrows. Your arrows are going left and they are going right. So there is no beginning or ending point. So my domain would be negative infinity to infinity. My range. These arrows are not flattening out. They're not horizontal. They are slowly growing up and down. So your range also does not have a beginning or end. So it would also be a negative infinity to infinity. And that's domain and range on 3 different types of graphs.